Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State. Sponsored once again by On Fire Ministries in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news, where it's not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. It's about our hope not being in man, but in Jesus Christ. About not ending in prayer, but moving to action. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Father, deliver us from the evil one.
Welcome to Patriot Radio.
Good afternoon, fellow patriots. Today on Patriot Radio, some dramatic events in South America, where it looks like there may be the reimposition of the Monroe Doctrine. Also, China, hell-bent on war. China is just continuing to make statements that really mean it's hell-bent on war and is giving Russia the imprimatur to continue the war in Ukraine. Also, here on the national front, the Islamic infiltration of the United States, and whether you know it or not, we're already at war. Here at Patriot Radio, we want you to have the information before everyone else so you and your family can be prepared for the times that are ahead and the times that are already upon us. But no fear, we were made for this. But follow us on patriotradio.us/telegram for real-time intelligence analysis and breaking news. Also, during this time, there's a lot of things that are going to happen in the next 60 days. I'm not the only one saying this, obviously, but we need to be in prayer, focused on the Lord during these times. patriotradio.us/prayer. We have a team standing by to pray with you and for you. And that brings us now to your wisdom from the Word. Coming to us from Luke 21:25, there will be signs in the sun and moon and stars, kind of like the blood moon. And on the earth, distress among nations, in perplexity at the roaring of the seas and the waves, people fainting from fear and the expectation of the things that are coming upon the world. The powers of the heavens will be shaken, or the powers of the heavens will be shaken. The world is going to change. The United States already has changed by the end of August. With the redistricting here in the United States, that is going to put the Democrats into the political wilderness for the next 20 years. They know it. That's why we're seeing some of the fomenting of unrest, not just continuing, but reaching a fever pitch now inside the U.S. The enemy knows that his time is short. And so around the world right now, there are some things that are shaping up that we need to be paying attention to. September 22nd, Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, France and potentially 9 other countries are going to declare Palestine a state. Meanwhile, the Jewish people are going to be invading Gaza and seizing control. So, it's interesting that it's 10 nations out of Europe, and it specifically concerns Israel. I'm watching this extraordinarily closely because it matches some prophetic words out of Scripture. So, we need to watch this. Also, you have the sacrifice, real or dress rehearsal of the red heifer in Israel. The debate's still there. The cornerstones of the temple already cut, and particularly the main cornerstone already cut. A shofar blown on the Temple Mount, and it sounds like coming up here at the Feast of Trumpets, which is also starting on the 22nd, 23rd of this September, you have the blowing of trumpets on the Temple Mount, potentially, for the first time in 2,000 years or so. There are a lot of things happening in the world, and China poised right now to invade Taiwan. The French, in a secret memo, telling their own medical system to be prepared for war by next March. All of these things together should not gin up fear in you if you're listening to my voice right now. It should be a motivator that we are in as Christians the greatest harvest in the history of the world. And what are we doing in this time? Because the signs are all around us. And while the world may be shaken, we stand on the solid rock and we will weather the storm. But we have to make sure that we're on the solid rock in Jesus' name. That brings us now to your daily intelligence briefing, coming to us from the globalist front.
The future is built by us. We have the means to make progress on the global agenda.
So now the transhumanists and the AI technocrats targeting our children. Not just with body-altering surgery and psychotropic drugs. Next comes AI-driven toys. Sam Altman and OpenAI see no problem with partnering with Mattel to create a line of toys that will rewire children's brains. It's interesting, what masquerades as benign screen-free companions is likely a meticulously orchestrated psyop engineered to erode the very essence of human sovereignty and pave the way for transhumanist utopia where flesh yields to code and souls are harvested for the new spheric grid, a coordinated assault on human consciousness designed to condition the next generation for total digital dependency. In other words, AI, at least in children's toys, may be designed, in fact, to make our children more dependent on them and not less, which is what is going to put out there. You won't have to work as much, you won't have to think as much, and that may actually be the exact wrong answer. Also, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin were caught on a hot mic talking about organ transplant, extending life to 150 years. China's decades-long program of forced organ harvesting from political and religious prisoners continues. And here we have caught on the hot mic the reason why they want immortality. In fact, this is the whole idea behind transhumanism, that they seek something they can never have, and God will never allow them to have. The conversation between Xi, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un was captured on a live feed as the leaders ascended the Tiananmen Gate in Beijing, where they would observe a ceremony marking the 80th anniversary of Japan's defeat. Audio of the exchange on longevity lasted more than a minute, dropped out at times, and caught only snippets of the interaction. It picked up the conversation with Xi saying in Mandarin, "These days and 70 years old." A translator apparently relaying Xi's remarks then was heard in Russian saying, "Earlier people rarely lived to 70, but these days at 70, you're still a child." Putin then responded, gesturing with his fingers as he spoke in a comment that couldn't be heard. The idea here, with the translator relaying the Russian leader's remarks, saying in Mandarin, with the development of biotechnology, human organs can be continuously transplanted, and people can live younger and younger and even achieve immortality. Predictions are this century, there's a chance of us living to 150. Again, this is what's behind all of it. Rarely does it get caught on a hot mic, but it did. And this is the continued pursuit of turning people into gods. Also, a new synthetic life form could spell doom for humankind. I don't know, but DNA is forced to fold to the left instead of to the right. The rest of the scientific community is screaming, "Stop it." Finally, the rest of the world is asking the question about what research should continue and what should cease. It's a technology that doesn't even exist yet, but its effects could be so drastically destructive that scientists in the field are calling for it to be banned now before it's too late. It's called mirror life. I want you to remember that term. Synthetic organisms that quite literally turn natural biology on its head. Mirror life forms contain DNA structures that are the mirror image of all known human organisms. How about we just stop right there messing around with God's creation? On a positive note, the globalists are, well, in for a fight, as it were, with Conor McGregor officially announcing his run for Ireland's presidency. The election set for October 24th this year. Conor McGregor, of course, a UFC champion, but also an Irish patriot and somebody who understands that, well, nations like Ireland are worth protecting from replacement. Conor McGregor and his campaign, I really think, are going to reveal the heart and the soul of the Irish, who kicked out the English after 800 years and are now facing another existential crisis and a battle for national identity. On the bigger picture, though, it's really a battle, again, between the globalists and the nationalists. We're about to see who wins. Also, just in time for fall, the Health Ministry of the Democratic Republic of Congo reports a new Ebola outbreak. We're going to keep our eyes on this. Interesting how that always seems to coincide with the fall. By the way, aren't they in a different side of the equator? Or are they right on it? China expands influence in the Western Hemisphere, and this is more than just globalism here. This is really about China. So we're going to move next to the China front, and I want you to pay attention to where China is investing, and then also some newfound discoveries and an election here in South America that has changed everything. China is expanding its influence in the Western Hemisphere with a drilling operation in Venezuela. The Chinese Concord Resources Corporation, a private Chinese firm, no such real thing in China, deployed its first drilling rig to Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela, marking a significant step in China's growing presence in the Western Hemisphere. This is intended to be inflammatory toward the United States, but also the Venezuelans have a problem. Oil was found in a significant amount next door in Guyana, and we're going to talk about what that means here in just a second. Also on the China front, Chinese national cancer researcher busted, caught allegedly stealing secrets for the communist CCP. Yunhai Li, a 35-year-old cancer researcher and Chinese national, allegedly stole trade secrets related to his work and may have been trying to take the information to China. He worked at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas for the past 3 years and now faces 2 charges, theft of trade secrets and tampering with a government record. So the crackdown on the communist Chinese infiltration in the United States is well apace. Also, Janine Pirro posting that you are looking at the largest seizure of precursor chemicals used to manufacture methamphetamines in U.S. history. China was sending over 700,000 pounds on the high seas to the Sinaloa cartel before my office seized them. So we're seeing a shift now to intercept in South America what China has been sending over to demoralize and destabilize the United States. Also, the FBI was in Cincinnati to announce charges in an operation targeting the fentanyl crisis. 22 Chinese business people have been indicted for selling drugs headed to the streets of Ohio. 2 Dayton area residents were also indicted along with 4 Chinese-based companies. So again, these networks being broken up clearly here in China. Also, the Pentagon is cracking down on big tech's coziness with China. Secretary Hegseth, if you're thinking America first and common sense, this doesn't pass either of those tests. The use of Chinese nationals to serve as Department of Defense cloud environments is over. And I suspect they're going to search in other contracts if Chinese nationals are being used as well. And it's about time. Also, the Philippines has opened a new forward operating base in Mahatao, Batanes, which is just 120 miles south of Taiwan. You can see the graphic there. This is a key forward operating base to stop the Chinese at the first island chain in the event of war. China's PLA is also strapping soldiers into powered exoskeletons where they can carry 100 plus pounds at high altitude and run on power tool batteries and march alongside robotic dogs and drones. This isn't sci-fi, ladies and gentlemen. It's actually here, and you can read that thread by Rod D. Martin. Also, the White House has said that Trump is stressing that European leaders should increase economic pressure on China for funding Russia's war efforts. In addition to that, Trump mentioned that The Europeans should also stop buying Russian oil and funding the war efforts if they want to take that on. That's going to become important for a couple articles we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. Leaders of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization released a declaration condemning Israel and U.S. strikes on Iran, rejecting the Eurogroup push to reinstate UN Security Council sanctions on Iran, recognizing the establishment of a Palestinian state, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, and supporting the creation of a development bank. The summit did not call on the release of hostages held in Gaza, but there you see the head of India, Russia, and China. Trump, interestingly enough, said, "Send my regards to President Putin and to President Xi while they are conspiring behind our backs." That's a paraphrase, but he's recognizing, I think, the intelligence coming in that China and Russia are still trying to take down the United States of America. Xi slams the bullying behavior in the world order, obviously aimed at President Trump. You know, it's interesting, when the real bullies get punched in the nose, they go away screaming. Also, President Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin took turns Monday swiping at the West during a gathering of Eurasian leaders for a showpiece summit aimed at putting Beijing front and center of regional relations. And it does look like now the Europeans are going to have to choose a side, which means that Western values are going to have to be upheld, like freedom of speech in Europe, and also the Islamic invasion that is happening there is going to have to be dealt with. And that takes us to the Middle East front. Hamas signals now a willingness on hostages after Trump's remarks. Well, yeah, and the fact that the Israelis now are beginning operations in Gaza after calling out 40,000 reservists. Yeah, of course, they know they're about to lose. And Israel very clearly saying that Hamas leaders outside of Gaza, mainly in Qatar and other places, are also likely to be targets. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson said Europeans are acting under Washington's orders and added that Tehran is coordinating with Russia and China to block the illegitimate European course. Folks, we're headed toward a world war right now, and all of this is part of it. Also on the sidelines of the Shanghai summit, the head of Iran held a meeting with the UN Secretary General. The OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the Socialist International are the two biggest blocs at the United Nations, and it's interesting that Antonio Gutierrez used to be the head of the Socialist International, and of course the OIC trying to weigh in, particularly on issues like Israel and the United States. You see, it was never about Israel. It was about protecting the West and Western civilization. Israel just happened to be in the way. And it's important for all of us to understand that from a practical perspective, studying who is really in charge in the United Nations, in addition to the globalists. Iran's passive defense chief, leaders acted cautiously with technology, no evidence of smart tools used to target them. They're still trying to figure out how Israel targeted targets in Iran. Turkish President Erdogan says we will continue to oppose any attempt that threatens the security and territorial integrity of our neighbor, Syria. So Turkey's saying they will still have a stake there. After the Turks tried to set up some air defense systems outside of Damascus airport, and the Israelis took them out. Also, the former Sueda general security chief is accused of ordering attacks that killed over 2,000 Druze civilians. He's never faced prosecution. Arab media highlights this as part of Syria's broader religiously motivated repression and calls for international accountability. In addition to that, now the Christians next to the Druze community in southwest Syria, the Valley of the Christians, are now calling for help internationally and from the Druze as they also face genocide and attacks. When we come back from the break, Russia seems like it's going to continue the war. And here back home at the National Front, the Islamic infiltration, what's being done about it.
What if I told you you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling VERITY Metals today.
And we're back with the Russia front. The European Commission intends to increase funding for Lithuania to track Russian trains going to Kaliningrad, and that enclave clearly building up right now. There's indicator after indicator that the Europeans are preparing for World War III in the near term. I'm talking in the next year. And a leaked memo in France that I mentioned earlier, where they were preparing by March of next year, it just seems like we are headlong toward this. And President Trump obviously doing everything he can to try to stave it off. Putin defended the Ukrainian invasion at the China summit and blamed the West for it, despite his years of rhetoric, speeches to the contrary. Not saying that the West didn't have anything to do with this, but I am saying that there are reasons that the Eastern globalists, the Chinese and Russians, and now maybe even the Indians, want to have a war. Very unfortunate. The general staff of the Russian army is now having meetings in front of a map that shows the Ukrainian regions of Mykolaiv and Odessa as part of Russia, and also what appears to be on the border of Moldova, which they've already targeted. So as you can see there, their ambitions are clear, and it's not for peace, at least in the near term. Macron, after talks with Trump, said, if Russia continues to refuse concrete peace negotiations, then together with the U.S., we'll move forward with additional sanctions. It looks like those will be in the offing with Russia very soon. Meanwhile, the U.S. is halting Pentagon Section 333 funding for training and equipping Eastern European militaries on the front line against Russia. The Baltic states would face significant challenges without U.S. security aid amid Moscow-linked attacks on critical infrastructure, cyber attacks, and sabotage. Also today, 2 more drones violated. I think it was Polish airspace. This came right before I came on the broadcast. And the U.S. is reviewing global troop deployments and plans to reduce its military presence in Europe. Part of this, you got to see it for what it is. Not Trump abandoning Europe. He's putting pressure on Europe to step up and fulfill their role in NATO, number one. And number two, he's putting pressure on Europe to stop buying Russian oil if they really want to see the war come to an end. Also, the Bulgarian migrant Fatos Ali Dumana has been charged by police in Scotland with assaulting a minor after this viral video of a Scottish girl standing like Braveheart against a potential assault of her sister. And it might have been her friend. There's conflicting reports coming out, but either way, this has gone viral, and this has really galvanized the fight in Scotland, in Ireland, and in England. And that brings us now to the South America front. Peru's Congress today followed Trump's designation of the Cartel de Los Soles, headed by Nicolas Maduro, as an international terrorist organization. It's another harsh blow to the narco regime of Nicolas Maduro. In addition to that, Secretary of State Marco Rubio designated Ecuadorian gangs Los Chaneros and Los Lobos as foreign terrorist organizations, and specially designated global terrorists. All of this comes on the heels of the United States military taking out 11 narco terrorists on a boat off the coast of Venezuela. And I agree with J. Michael Waller. I've been waiting my entire life to hear these words. I don't care what the UN says. The UN doesn't know what they're talking about. Maduro is an indicted drug trafficker in the United States, and he's a fugitive of American justice. This really does look like the imposition of the Monroe Doctrine now in the Western Hemisphere, and I expect something to happen off the coast of Venezuela even more dramatic than already has. What legal authority did you operate under to take down a Venezuelan cartel boat? J.D. Vance replied, the legal authority is that there are terrorists bringing deadly drugs into our country, and POTUS ran on the promise of stopping it. Next. In addition to that, Pete Hegseth said, there's no reason for me to give the public or adversaries any more information than that. But if you're trafficking drugs and you're a known cartel entity, designated terror organization, and you're headed for the United States or part of the process that would head to the United States, they will have lethal consequences. Seems to be an indicator the United States may actually begin operations in Mexico. So this is something that would shift the game dramatically. Also, a patrol boat operated by soldiers of the Guyanese Defense Force, or Guyanese Defense Force, and officers of the Guyanese Police Force reportedly came under fire today from the Venezuelan side of the Sayuni River in the Essequibo region while escorting a boat containing election officials and polling supplies for the upcoming presidential election. Actually, it was a presidential election on September 1st. So the reason this is important is that Guyana has a massive amount of oil that's been discovered there and would easily replace Venezuela if developed. So obviously the Venezuelans don't like that, and there was some pressure before the presidential elections, but re-election of Guyana's president, Irfan Ali, Wednesday, to a second term, means that the people of Guyana want their nation's newfound oil riches to turn into prosperity with United States help. So that is a huge shift in South America. Now, the National Front. Gold over $3,500, silver over $40. Incredible times right now. Also a resurgence in American manufacturing. Factories just logged their fastest growth since the lockdowns ended, growing demand, new orders, and rising confidence. You can read that with Rod D. Martin's thread as well. All of this, the prosperity now, the engine of America moving. But meanwhile, 500 plus Catholic churches attacked in the United States in 2020, and very likely double that amount Protestant churches in the United States, especially with suspicious activity reports. So interesting as we continue that unity of fields is Hamas and is putting out more rhetoric, in addition to the rhetoric of liberals after the Minneapolis shooting, to do more violence against Christians. You have some very clear statements by Unity of Fields talking about violence here in the United States, again, seemingly aimed here at Christians. So, no surprise that a Muslim who immigrated to America, when asked why he is here, said that he's here to spread Islam and wage jihad. They're telling us what they want to do here. So these networks need to be disrupted. Today, Tom Cotton requested an FBI investigation into the Palestinian youth movement for directly threatening U.S. national security. So we have some of these networks that should already be on a list of organizations to be investigated. But this needs to happen on the quick near term because we're seeing Sharia law now come into America. Dearborn Heights Police Department revealed the nation's first ever uniform patch featuring an Arabic script, for example. Also, we still are having a debate on banning the Muslim Brotherhood. We should just do it already. Elon Musk has come out reposting Tommy Robinson that there needs to be a ban on the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood isn't merely a theological school of thought. It is also a deliberate and well-structured transnational political project whose ultimate aim is the remaking of society along Islamist lines. So this was posted by Visegrad 24. We need to do this, and we need to do it quickly. Also, the transgender shooter, we call them MUS, and you'll hear that from our guest later today, Selwyn Duke, had ties to the Socialist Rifle Association and the rise of far-left militancy. Do you have an SRA chapter in your neighborhood? Well, we should start checking. Also, the Trump DOJ is considering a gun ban for transgender individuals along mental health lines. Be very careful with this. This can backfire in a double-edged sword, especially regarding veterans, which they've wanted to do for a long time. Also, Trump proposes anti-crime initiatives in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles and Baltimore, including the potential deployment of the National Guard. Now, with that said, that's the briefing, and here is what you can do. You can stand up. You can tell the truth on this news and share it with your friends and family. I'm going to do another, what you can do at the end of the episode, but today, come on to our thread on Patriot Radio. Hit share. Make sure your friends and family see this. The time is short. When we come back from after the break, our guest, Selwyn Duke.
What if I told you you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today.
And we're back with our guest today, Selwyn Duke. He's a writer for The New American. And we've talked quite a bit about the moral state of the United States. Now we're going to kind of go to some outgrowth of this decline in morality. And the first issue I want to talk with you about, Selwyn, and obviously, once again, thank you for joining us on Patriot Radio, selwynduke.com, is this shooting in Minneapolis. It's highlighted so many things, but the first is that it's okay now to kill people that you disagree with. I mean, this is kind of an outgrowth of decline of morality, is that it will turn into, I'm going to shoot somebody that I disagree with, and that is going to be okay. And we've just seen kind of the normalization of this, especially in the wake of the shooting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I've seen polls recently, Matt, indicating that an alarming percentage of Democrats actually believe it's okay to use violence and even to engage in murder for political purposes. In fact, I think a very alarming percentage of them even said that it would be okay to assassinate Donald Trump for political reasons. So yeah, we have seen this normalized for many years now. I mean, look at the philosophies that the left has been putting forward now for many, many years. They have said, for instance, that silence is violence even. They've said that words can be violence. So they're conflating violence with things that we should be able to do, namely exercise our First Amendment rights. They're putting them on the same plane. Now, when you do that, of course, you demonize certain speech and you work against respect for the First Amendment. But what you also do is you start to legitimize violence. And that, of course, is very, very dangerous. And that's the sign of a civilization experiencing severe moral decay, as you said.
So we've seen this, not just calls on social media, which a lot of people can hide behind their keyboards, but we've actually seen protests normalizing this, calling for more violence. In fact, one particular individual in a video said there needs to be more violence, more attacks against Christians. And this is something that 10 years ago, people said, oh, man, that's a conspiracy theory. It's never going to happen. The New American has been warning about it for years, and I know you have as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And look, I mean, we want to actually provide a balanced view here. Maybe this is getting too much in the weeds. I don't know. But, we're not pacifists, but we're not militarists either. Okay, now what governs this? What governs this is something called just war doctrine, which was promulgated by good theologians a long, long time ago. And for a war, for any violent action to be just, certain criteria must be met. First of all, there must be a reasonable chance of success. That's one of them. Another one is that the proposed action must do more good than harm. Well, obviously, right there, what these left-wingers are engaged in, it doesn't qualify at all. Now, I'm just saying this because I don't want people to say, well, you're saying violence is never necessary. What did the founding fathers do? Again, you have to apply just war doctrine. You have to apply the correct principles.
Yeah, and I've actually taught just war for years. In fact, every time we would go overseas, 2000 to Bosnia, then 2004 to Iraq, we would actually teach, as commanders, we would teach the troops on just war theory. I know that might blow some people away, but it was the idea to not just have a just cause, but have a just fight. In other words, it was justly prosecuted. And like you said, there had to be a reasonable chance of success. It couldn't be a suicide mission, but also that the ends weren't justifying the means in a very negative way of just wiping out entire villages or something like was accused with My Lai, so in Vietnam. So this was an important thing. And it was interesting that on that point, that the left would attack and say, well, you're calling for violence against the left. No, we're just giving a moral framework from within which to evaluate every situation in an objective sense morally, according to God's standard. And I think that that's really what is, a burr under the saddle of the left, as it were.
Yeah, well, absolutely. You have to remember that you're dealing with people here on the left who operate emotionally. And as Ben Franklin put it, passion governs and she never governs wisely. And that's the problem. And that's something all of us humans have to guard against, because we have an emotional realm, and what feels right can be very, very alluring. And it's hard to buck that with an intellectual understanding very often. And that's why you have to be very firm and very definitive about these things. There is right and there is wrong. Truth exists. That's what we're supposed to govern ourselves with. Virtue exists. We've talked about the virtues, you and I, at length. And other principles exist, of course. They are extensions of truth, like just war doctrine, which we were just talking about. But yes, the left is operating based on emotion. And another way to define them is this. I often call them this. They are low virtue people. Now, if some people say that sounds harsh, yeah, I'm just trying to define it properly, because the truth is that, as Plato said, the ancient Greek philosopher, it's very important when forming children to raise them in an atmosphere of nobility and grace, so that while they're still too young to understand intellectual principles, they can develop an emotional attachment to virtue. And then when they reach the age of reason, they'll be more amenable to the dictates of reason. People on the left, we're calling them people on the left, they are people who unfortunately have developed an emotional attachment to vice. And so when they reached the age of reason, they started gravitating towards vice-oriented ideologies, philosophies, worldviews, whatever you want to call them. Now, understand, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. We're all sinners, okay? So we're all on the spectrum somewhere, and I'm not talking about a sexual spectrum like the left does. I'm talking about the spectrum of goodness. None of us are perfect. None of us are all evil. But the point is if you want to define it very simply, they are low virtue people. There are other people who, at least to some degree, seek after virtue. And that's what we're called to do. And again, virtue refers to that set of objectively good moral habits.
So, if you look my name up on the internet, you will see something called the biblical basis for war. What they neglect to say is that it was the biblical basis for war in the Old Testament, and that now, because of the potentiality for everyone to become a temple of the Holy Spirit, it gave rise to just war doctrine and very much the principle of self-defense, that we can't be complicit in the sin of others if they're ravaging through the countryside, killing people, and we have the ability to stop it, yet do nothing. And I think that that's an important point in talking about this from a Christian perspective, because what the left is advocating right now is the ravaging. And this is an interesting convergence between the red, the communists and the Marxists, and the jihadis, is they are advocating for this violent ravaging through the countryside and through society, and morally justifying it by essentially an ends justifies the mean argument that the penultimate communism or the penultimate caliphate means that we can do this so that everybody comes under some kind of subjugation, and that's going to bring peace. If you could elaborate a little bit more on this, and especially in light of the Minnesota shooter, we're going to kind of tie this in with some of the things that were found on that person's firearms and also their writings.
Yeah, well, when you're talking about the jihadis and these hardcore leftists, you really have to say, well, politics really does make strange bedfellows, because these people morally don't have that much in common. But right now, they're allies, just as we were allied with Joseph Stalin for a while during World War II, even though he was an absolute monster, a mass murderer. These people are allies right now, but of course, the jihadis have no use for these leftists, and we see what happens when they take control. I mean, you look at Hamtramck, Michigan, we understand that's the first town, first city in the United States to have an all-Muslim government. Well, what was the first thing they did when they took over from the old-line Democrats? Karen Majewski actually had been the governor. The mayor, excuse me. Well, one of the first things they did was they banned the pride flag on public property. Okay, right. Now I agree with that, by the way, but the old-line Democrats like Majewski, they were very, very upset. They said, we stood by you, we were in your corner, and this is how you repay us. Well, what did you think was going to happen? But yes, we see this unholy alliance between the two groups. And you mentioned that shooting in Minneapolis. Well, Absolutely. I mean, that's another aspect of our moral decay, because you have here a poor young man, and I'm calling him that because he's someone who had been brainwashed with the so-called transgender nonsense. By the way, I don't call it transgender. I call these individuals individuals, made up sexual status. That's an acronym because it's very important, Matt, that we control the language of the debate if we're going to win the debate. So he was brainwashed with this nonsense. He even said that he regretted having brainwashed himself. But, again, look what happens when you cause people to decline in virtue. This is what happens. And stop me if I'm going on too long, but it reminds me of something C.S. Lewis said. He said, a lot of people will say, well, it doesn't matter what anyone does or how they behave or what they are as long as they don't hurt anyone else. But he said, the point is this, it's like a fleet of ships. That's like saying, well, it doesn't matter how the individual ships function as long as they don't crash into each other. But if they don't function properly, they may not be able to avoid crashing into each other. And it's the same thing here. If we do not breed moral people, if these people are dysfunctional, to use a psychobabble term, then ultimately they're not going to be able to avoid crashing into each other, so to speak. And what we saw in Minneapolis is a symptom of that. And by the way, I wrote about this years ago. Most individuals are more likely to kill than be killed, and they're also overrepresented among pedophiles. And it's not surprising because we're talking about very troubled individuals.
That's exactly right. And let's go into some of the details here as part of the shooting, just so we get a very clear picture. This is by his own admission. And so if we could bring up the first few pictures. So you have a connection right here to, we'll call it mus terror, and some people call it trans terror. And if we go back one real quick, I want to just go through these images a little slowly. You'll see at the top a very clear satanic image advocating death. And then you will also see the defend equality sign or symbol that has been found as part of a lot of these trans terror and we call them now mus terror shootings, advocacy for violence. You see this as a common thread. That's an AK-47 right there. And this has been going on for a couple of years now. So let's move to the next one. And you see then the other common thread, 6 million was not enough, referring to the Holocaust, that there should be more Jews killed. Then you see also an anti-Israel slogan there at the very top. Israel must fall. Then you see the anti-Christian putting Jesus Christ up on a target, shooting at him, advocating the assassination of President Trump, and then glorifying other mass shootings. Then you see Muhammad Atta's name invoked, who was one of the leaders of the 9/11 hijackers. Then you see another Muslim saying invoked. So you have a very clear connection now across the board. Overt Satanism, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, pro-Islam, and pro-Marxist writings. And by the way, he wrote his manifesto in Cyrillic. I have not heard anybody else ask this question. Where did he learn Cyrillic? I mean, can we talk about that? So what does this mean, morally speaking, when you see all of these things converging? And then more importantly, how do we fight back against this?
Yeah, well, I think really if you want to see the big picture, what all these things have in common is that they're evil. That's the bottom line. And evil is attracted to evil. Now, I know Milo Yiannopoulos once put it this way, and I know what his past is, but in recent years he's tried to walk with God, I understand. He said, quote, trannies are demonic. He always minces words. You know that, right, yeah. Milo Yiannopoulos?
Right.
And it's interesting because if you look at Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ, how did he portray Satan? He portrayed Satan very cleverly as being androgynous. You couldn't tell if he was male or female, and that makes absolute sense because what does Satan want to do? He wants to turn God's plan on its head. God made them male and female, he made them. Satan wants to turn that on its head, doesn't want children to obey parents, so on and so forth. So that's what we see. We see this evil, and you talk about this imagery. This is all in accordance with what I just said, part of a culture of death, which completely permeates the left. I mean, I know this may seem unrelated, maybe even a bit frivolous, but you look at PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. I heard one of their representatives, Matt, actually say years ago that an animal is better off dead than being someone's pet. Okay? Again, the culture of death. That's something that, of course, is not as bad as killing people, but it's the same mentality. These are not people who appreciate life, who revel in it. That's why their birth rates are so low, by the way. We may discuss that. Because they are part of this culture of death, and that is evil. That is of the devil, and that's the connection that we're seeing here. Now, what do we do about it? I hate to be redundant because I know you and I have discussed this in the past, but first of all, we need moral renewal in this country, which we can get into again, but again, we've gone over that. But also, one thing I think we need to do is, with respect to this so-called must agenda, is we have to recognize, and this is why I use the term must, that transgender people do not exist. We have to be firm in that. And I say that not to offend anyone, but because, again, you have to control the language of the debate. When you use that term, you're aiding and abetting the other side. And I say they don't exist, transgender people, because A, properly understood, people exhibit the phenomenon known as sex, not gender. Words have gender, and you can't change your sex. It's impossible. So that's why I say they don't exist. We have to be firm in that. We again have to be firm in the fact that if someone is exhibiting this phenomenon, he has a severe psychological issue in the least, and it has to be labeled as such. We have to ask, why was this Westman, Robert Westman character who perpetrated the shooting, able to legally purchase guns? I mean, the left talks about that. Well, mentally ill people shouldn't be allowed to purchase guns. But then they want to take mental illnesses and label them as lifestyle choices. So right. It's self-defeating, isn't it?
It very much is. And the Christian worldview should be one of life and one of truth. We shouldn't give in to the unreality that's there. So when we come back from the break, more with Selwyn Duke, selwynduke.com, we're going to be talking about how moral decay in this country has also led to this massive drop in fertility rates, even in Europe.
What if I told you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today.
And we're back with Selwyn Duke, our guest today, selwynduke.com, and we're talking about the moral decay, the outgrowth of these things, and what it's resulting in society. Elon Musk coming out very clearly saying there is an existential problem in the West with fertility rates, not just in Europe, also in the United States. Why is this happening? Why has there been a drop in fertility rates and people just creating families?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Matt, because I've been writing about this for at least a generation. People probably don't know that. It's a long-standing phenomenon. About 100 countries, or the better part of 100 countries worldwide now, have fertility rates below replacement level. Replacement level is 2.1 children per woman. And in the West, it's particularly bad. It's also bad in Japan. It's even worse in South Korea. I mean, things have really cratered there. But the truth is that Western people are disappearing. Our birth rate here in the United States, I think, is 1.79, something like that. Now, it's interesting, though. You asked what the reason for this was. Well, I think you see a hint as to the reason in another statistic. We know the West has low fertility rates. What we seldom talk about is which Westerners are responsible for that. And if you look at conservative, self-professed ones, you'll see that their fertility rate is still relatively robust. It's about 2.1 to 2.3, so at least replacement level. If you look at self-professed liberals, theirs is 1.6 to 1.7 in that neighborhood, okay? Now, a lot of people have said this means the left is disappearing because they're not reproducing themselves, and that may be true to some extent. Of course, the other side of the coin is that they're very good at winning converts to their cause by brainwashing kids in the schools, through entertainment, big tech. But yes, you see this phenomenon. You asked why it's happening. I said, well, that hints at it. Well, there was this great documentary years ago that I reviewed called Demographic Winter on this topic, and they defined 5 main reasons for these declining birth rates. They are the sexual revolution, prosperity, the divorce revolution, inaccurate assumptions, and women working. In other words, careerism. Wow. Now, Yeah, the reason that's significant is that they said the greatest predictor of family size is the number of kids that women say that they want. And when women become embroiled in careerism, what happens is they delay marriage, they delay childbearing, then maybe they have one child later in life when they're not that fertile anymore. Maybe they have no children at all. Okay. And of course, the divorce revolution was mentioned, the sexual revolution. I mean, the fact is you have the pill, so now people can avoid pregnancy altogether. But if you look at the only Westerners who really are reproducing, that tells the tale too. They tend to be the religious people, whether they're devout Christians, Muslims, or Jews. They are the ones having the large families. I mean, anecdotally, Matt, I know personally of two Catholic families, they're devout Catholics. Between them, they have 19 kids. So that's just an example of what I'm talking about. But yes, so basically, secularism is the issue, godlessness is the issue, because when people descend into secularism, they no longer appreciate life in the same way. They no longer answer that call to be fruitful and multiply. They descend into things such as materialism, where they start valuing things more than people, and then it's, well, if I have kids, then I'm not going to have as much money. I'm not going to have the nice house, the nice vacation, the nice car. I'm going to have to sacrifice on that end. So it's multifaceted, but that's basically what it amounts to.
Let's talk a little bit about selfishness, nihilism, the idea, which is people throw around narcissism today, and it really kind of is annoying because I don't think that means what they think it means. I'm not going to get into that today. However, I do think it's important to talk about selfishness. I mean, there was something that was generational in the United States. We're looking generations into the future. We're sowing today for generations to reap a harvest as well. And we've seen a rise in me, I, that really is playing into this entire moral decay regarding fertility rates, because it's about how they want kids. Well, what about the potentiality for the next generation? How do you view this issue?
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely correct. And again, that's a function of godlessness. I mean, when people are selfish, when people are not inculcated with charity and kindness, charity, by the way, is a virtue, technically, then, of course, they're going to put themselves first, perhaps. And, you know, G.K. Chesterton put it very well. It's sort of funny. He said, we miss the main reason why people are selfish, and that's because they have a self. And the point is we have to be taught to go beyond that. And absolutely, this has to do with godlessness. It has to do with what comes along with that. For instance, if we're just cosmic accidents, then as I always say, what are we? We're just some pounds of chemicals and water. We're organic robots. And then what is the point of anything? What is the point of creating more organic robots? Why would you value them if you don't see them as divine beings infused with a soul? Then it all boils down to what occultist Aleister Crowley did. What he said, his formulation, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Then why not just be a hedonist? If there's no truth, if there's no ultimate meaning to anything, you might as well just pursue pleasure for the limited time you have in this world. So that all is part of the problem here. And again, if you don't get back to God, these are the morasses you're going to descend into.
Exactly right. And we have an opportunity for this generation to really espouse, some simplistic maybe things. But one of them is, I think people should get married younger. I think they should have a lot of kids. I think that they should pull their children or never put them into government schools and educate them at home or through key private schools, because not all private schools are the same either. These are pretty simple things. How do you answer the person and say, well, that doesn't sound like happiness to me. This must be some sort of patriarchal, formula to keep me under the thumb of the men who want to rule the world. How do you address that?
Yeah, well, changing that person's mind might be difficult, but what that boils down to is this. What is your conception of happiness, and what do you feel, more importantly, is happiness on an emotional level? And this gets back to what Plato was talking about, okay? If kids are not inculcated with virtue, they're going to have the wrong conception of happiness. If they have an emotional attachment device, then of course they're going to be treasuring things like transitory pleasures, sex, watching things on TV, watching nonsense, doing drugs, drinking, partying, of course. On the other hand, if they have that foundation of virtue, then they're going to find fulfillment in other things. So as the twig is bent, so grows the tree. And that's why it's so important to raise kids correctly, because as that Jesuit saying informs, show me a child at 7 and I'll show you the man. If you don't have him correctly formed by that age, you might be in for some serious, serious problems. And that's the issue we have, because now we have all these people who've been incorrectly formed. Now, what do? It's like set in stone. It's a very difficult situation.
But all things are possible through God who strengthens us. And standing up for the truth, I think that a lot of people now are awake to the fact that something is wrong, and they want the real answers. They want authentic answers. And I think that this is where we can step into it with episodes like this and everything that you're doing with this fight.
Absolutely. Listen, there is one exception to what I just said. If you truly experience conversion, the theological definition of which is turning from oneself to God, you can become a new creation. You can be born anew, become a child again, and then maybe God will change that foundation. He's the only one who can do it.
Amen. Selwyn Duke, always a fascinating conversation. Amazing job. Blessings to you, and as always, keep up the fight.
Thank you. God bless, Matt.
Selwyn Duke, selwynduke.com. So what can you do? Well, if you are interested in turning away from sin and turning toward Jesus Christ, getting rid of all of the lies and actually discovering an authentic relationship and the truth with Jesus Christ, patriotradio.us/salvation. We have a team standing by that will be honored to talk with you about those subjects and bring you to a saving knowledge of Jesus and give you some authentic answers with the truth in love so that we can walk with you down that path in Jesus' name. For everybody out there, thank you so much for joining me on Patriot Radio today. May God bless you, and may He really change your heart. Maybe there's an area of your life that you haven't yielded to Him as Lord. During your prayer time tonight, identify what that is. Surrender it to Him and see what happens in you and your family. The awakening is here, so keep up the fight.